Good afternoon. As you can see, Wing Commander Mike Bracken is already standing by Naples to give us an operational update. Libya continues to be high on NATO's political agenda. NATO ambassadors and our operational partners are focusing on the preparations for next week's defense ministers meeting. They will have discussions on Libya next Wednesday at the start of a two-day ministerial here in Brussels. I expect ministers will take stock and assess our operations. They will stress their strong commitment to keep up the military pressure on the Gaddafi regime for as long as necessary. Ministers will also make clear that Operation Unified Protector is only one element of a comprehensive effort to find a solution for the crisis in Libya. You will have seen, for instance, the very clear statement of the G8 summit at the weekend, which stressed that Gaddafi must go. The contact group will also meet in Abu Dhabi next week, next Wednesday in fact, and NATO will be represented by the Deputy Secretary General, Ambassador Claudio Bisogniero. The Secretary General is meeting this afternoon the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Jean Ping, and Libya was one of the key items discussed during the Secretary General's trip to Bulgaria yesterday with the President, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister and other senior officials. He also shared with the NATO Parliamentary Assembly in Varna his views about some of the first lessons learned from the conflict and from the operation in support of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973. The right concept, the right capabilities and the necessary commitment. He talked about the importance of effective decisions and early political consultations with partners, of the need for the alliance to have at its disposal the whole range of military capabilities and the political commitment to see the mission through. As the Secretary General said, our operation is achieving its objectives and we are preventing Gaddafi from fulfilling his. Gaddafi's reign of terror is coming to an end. Even the ones closest to him are departing, defecting and deserting, and we saw a confirmation of that yesterday with the defection of senior military officers, including 5 generals. So it's becoming increasingly clear to people inside and outside Libya that there is no future for a regime that uses violence against its own people. And with that, over to Wing Commander Mike Bracken in Naples. Mike.
Thank you, Oana, and good afternoon. Let me start this operational update by following on from Lieutenant General Bouchard's brief on Friday. In the east, Braga has remained quiet, with both pro- and anti-Gaddafi forces in the region dug into defensive positions and mounting few, if any, assaults. However, NATO continues to strike a number of significant military targets in the area, which continue to pose a threat to the civilian population. In Misrata, the situation continues to gradually improve for the people who live there. Life is getting better. There are still occasional reports of shellings, but these are becoming less frequent. The port is open. Humanitarian shipments are arriving unhindered by the actions of pro-Gaddafi forces, and anti-Gaddafi forces are pushing further out from the city. Moving west, the front line between Zlintan and Misrata is currently the most fluid and volatile in Libya. Pro-Gaddafi forces have several times indiscriminately shelled the town of Daphnia, and there are indications that the pro-Gaddafi forces have suppressed a number of popular anti-Gaddafi uprisings in Zlitan. In the western Berber mountain region, brutal and indiscriminate shelling by pro-Gaddafi forces is making life extremely difficult and dangerous for the population of Yafran. However, we believe the situation has somewhat improved in other areas of the Berber Highlands where people are less endangered by the pro-Gaddafi forces for this moment in time. Finally, in Tripoli, we have clear indications that the population is being threatened by pro-Gaddafi forces during patrols and at checkpoints. Universities have been closed with the intent of preventing peaceful demonstrations being organised and any hint of anti-Gaddafi sentiment being developed into social unrest. NATO air operations have maintained an intense tempo in Tripoli, precision strikes continue on pro-Gaddafi forces and facilities which threaten the civilian population. So far, NATO has carried out over 9,000 sorties, of which about 3,500 have been strike sorties. In summary, pro-Gaddafi forces are on the back foot in many parts of Libya. Today, I would like to highlight the outstanding work done to support the air campaign by the air-to-air refuelling community. The success of our air campaign is due in no small part to the teamwork that goes unseen high above the Mediterranean, where NATO and contributing nations conduct air-to-air refuelling operations around the clock. NATO rarely speaks of this effort, but it plays a vital role in keeping over 100 aircraft flying over Libya every day. Roughly a quarter of the sorties flown in this mission so far have been by refuelling tanker aircraft. And of note, nearly every sortie not flown by a tanker has to get fuel in flight in order to accomplish its assigned mission. Aerial refuelling is known in military jargon as a force multiplier, as it extends the range of aircraft coming from distant bases and extends the time that fighters can spend on task once over Libya. This is the most diverse and extensive air-to-air refuelling operation in the history of aviation and is a clear example of the strength and cohesiveness of NATO. In other words, it is a linchpin of the operation. To meet our refuelling needs, 7 nations have provided over 40 tanker aircraft to support Operation Unified Protector under the command of NATO, and this effort is made up of 6 different aircraft types. Aerial refuelers, or tankers, are in simple terms fuel stations in the air. They provide around-the-clock service for NATO and its partners, thus enabling the strike aircraft to patrol the skies over Libya, engaging with pro-Gaddafi forces and providing protection to the civilian population. Tankers under NATO control are providing fuel to 23 different aircraft types from 13 nations. The receivers of this fuel span the full range of the air campaign, from fighters to reconnaissance and commander control aircraft. An air campaign of this size and scope would be severely hindered without a robust air-to-air refuelling operation, and ours involves between 35 and 40 sorties every day. It is challenging to orchestrate the multinational tanker aircraft to refuel the multinational receiver aircraft, but NATO and its partners are doing it daily. Recently, the United States offered additional tanker aircraft to NATO, allowing NATO to effectively increase its on-station times for strike aircraft by about 30%. While the tanker contribution is mostly invisible to the outside world, it is in fact one of the single most important aspects of the air campaign. The ability to deliver fuel in the air has allowed our strike aircraft to engage more pre-planned targets and to remain on station longer to strike targets of opportunity, gather intelligence, or enhance our overall command and control of the operation. In sum, air-to-air refuelling is a force multiplier, and the entire team should take great pride in knowing that the fuel they provide is contributing directly to the success of the mission. Now, during the clips that you will have just seen, you will have seen a number of different tanker aircraft. An Airbus 320 taking off, a Boeing C-135 refueling a Mirage 2000, an Airbus 310 refueling an F-18, a Tornado, and a Mirage 2000. Moving out to sea. To enforce the maritime embargo, NATO ships and airborne surveillance aircraft are keeping around-the-clock watch on shipping off the Libyan coast. In fact, our maritime forces have conducted over 1,000 hailings. NATO is stopping pro-Gaddafi regime forces using the sea as a covert highway for moving people and weapons to where they can be used against the population. NATO and its partners are challenging any suspicious vessels, and we've denied some ships from entering Libyan ports because their cargo could be used to help launch attacks on civilians. At the same time, NATO is doing all it can to ensure the Libyan people get food, essential supplies, and medical help by keeping the commercial and humanitarian shipping lanes from deliberate attacks and the danger of sea mines. In the past week, 74 commercial ships have entered Libyan ports, of which 25 have been carrying humanitarian assistance. Today, shipping flows freely into Benghazi, Misrata, Tripoli, and other Libyan ports. In fact, our reports indicate that a total of 266 humanitarian aid ships have entered Libyan ports in the last 7 weeks. However, NATO remains deeply concerned about the worsening humanitarian situation in other parts of Libya, and saddened but not surprised that pro-Gaddafi forces continue to go to such length to make ordinary men, women and children suffer through violence, hunger and fear. We are doing all we can to avert a humanitarian crisis and are working closely with the United Nations and aid organisations to improve access to the suffering population. NATO's actions have meant that some parts of the country, particularly in the east, are now safe enough for aid organisations to safely move essential supplies by road. As my commander said on Friday, this campaign is about more than just kinetic activity. Through leaflet drops and radio broadcasts, we continue to encourage pro-Gaddafi forces to abandon the fight, go home to their families, and focus on creating a peaceful future for themselves and their country. A number of pro-Gaddafi units have shown signs of wavering loyalty, and yesterday a number of senior pro-Gaddafi officers defected. The cracks in the Gaddafi regime are now clearly visible. NATO will continue to keep up the pressure on pro-Gaddafi forces in Tripoli, the Highlands, around Misrata, around Bracken, in fact anywhere that threatens the civilian population. That concludes my statement. I'm happy to take questions.